Morning, this is Badger Creek, and as you can see it's dry right now. But I'm going to see if I can get out of this wind and talk some anime.
Little Nemo in Slumberland.
Little Nemo, Adventures in Slumberland is an animated fantasy movie from 1989 that's aimed squarely at young children. The title character, Nemo, is a young boy who seems to spend all his time sleeping. In his dreams, he's taken off on a series of fantastical adventures. The movie begins in fast with Nemo fast asleep in his bed. He dreams that his bed flies off to a mysterious land. One day, Nemo watches the circus arrive in town with a grand parade. That night, Nemo dreams that he's visited by a very officious man who delivers a royal invitation from the king of Slumberland. Nemo is to become the official playmate of his daughter, Princess Camille. They all fly off together on a dirigible to this dreamland place. Of course, Nemo isn't going anywhere without his pet and constant companion, Icarus the flying squirrel. Unfortunately, along the way to meet the king, Nemo meets Flip instead. He's called a frightful fellow by the officious man. He's a cheerful and charismatic rogue and the big troublemaker in the kingdom. Those two wander off together for a bit, having fun by making mischief. Eventually, Nemo meets King Morpheus himself, who turns out to be a jovial, rotund man who seems to be modeled after Santa Claus. The king plans to make Nemo his heir and a prince to the kingdom. Don't ask why. He gives Nemo the royal scepter, very powerful, and the keys to the kingdom, also very powerful, with instructions that there's one door that he is never ever to open. Well, I think you can guess what happens next. I think I read this story in Genesis. The Princess Camille turns out to be a likable sort, and she and Nemo get along well, playing with the palace's collection of incredible toys.
They're jealous because we're having so much fun. Bon Bon!
Slumberland seems like it could be a pretty fun place to hang. Alas, Nemo will also need to take lessons in royal etiquette at the palace, delivered as part of a major song and dance production number, by the way. The schooling just bores Nemo, so he eventually wanders off with Flip again to get into more trouble, and he have fun. So what do you think they run into? Yes, that one door they're never supposed to open. And what do you suppose Flip wants to do? So, they open the door to Nightmare Land and let the nightmares escape. And what do you think they'll do about that? Well, pretty much the same thing any kid would do. They go back up to the palace and hope that nobody notices. It turns out the Nightmare King is pretty hard to ignore. Naturally, it will be up to Nemo, along with the princess, the professor, and a very reluctant Flip, to rescue Slumberland from the Nightmare King and lock all the bad dreams back in their place. Predictability on a large scale is just a small part of Little Nemo's plot problems. On a smaller scale, the plot relies on far too many convenient events, often illogical or without preparation. For example, if Nemo needs to know something, a letter will conveniently arrive at just the right time for the story to proceed. That's okay, I suppose, because it's a dream, so anything can happen. All these plot manipulations may be acceptable to children, but adults will find them grating. While Little Nemo is billed as a family film, it's really a children's movie with very little to either charm or interest adults.
You really bumped into something big here, kid.
I've got a bad feeling about this, Flip.
A door this big's got to have something really big behind it, kid.
Well, I guess just a little peek won't hurt.
Attaboy. Here, hop on. I'll boost you up.
Little Nemo descends from a long line of stories about protagonists whisked off to an odd, outlandish alternate world. Alice in Wonderland, Peter Pan, or The Wizard of Oz come to mind. So do a number of anime titles. Much like The Wizard of Oz, everyone Nemo meets in his dreamland adventures will look and act just like somebody he's met in the normal world, especially the people he saw in that circus parade at the beginning of the movie. Unfortunately, the title character, Nemo, isn't very interesting himself. He doesn't seem to have a will of his own, and he seems a bit thick-headed. Okay, so he's asleep. I'm a bit thick-headed myself when I've just woken up. But that means for the most part, Nemo is playing second banana to the so-called supporting cast, such as Flip, the Professor, the Princess, and King Morpheus, all of whom are smarter and more charismatic than Nemo. In effect, Nemo is a tourist in his own dream. Having such a dull and easily led main character handicaps the excitement. I think Nemo needed to be established as a more interesting and sympathetic person in the real world before the movie dragged him off into the movie's adventure in Slumberland. Anytime things get too intense in Slumberland, Nemo can invoke the ultimate Deus Ex Machina and simply wake up from his nightmare and find himself safely back in his bedroom. Or can he? In one late scene, he seems to have returned safely home again, a lucky wake-up escape from an attack by the creatures of the Nightmare Kingdom. But when the scepter of Slumberland's king and a couple of goblins suddenly appear in his bedroom too, well, perhaps the border between reality and dreams is breaking down.
No! The scepter! What a dream! Oh, wow! You all right, Nemo?
Could Nemo be having a dream within a dream? Nah, that's totally absurd. No one would buy a plot like that. Little Nemo Adventures in Slumberland is based on an old comic strip by Winsor McCay that ran in American newspapers from 1905 to 1915. That's even before my time, by the way. Like the comic strip, the movie is set in the very early 20th century, not that it matters a lot to the story. The idea of making it into an animation went to TMS producer Yutaka Fujioka, who licensed the rights. From there, he envisioned a joint Japanese-American project, sort of a half-anime. What followed was a difficult production history, as they say, made more interesting by the now famous people involved. In 1982, Isao Takahata and his partner Hayao Miyazaki began the project for TMS a year after Miyazaki had completed his first theatrical movie, The Castle of Cagliostro. Miyazaki left a year later and later described it as the worst experience of his professional career. Miyazaki collaborator Yoshifumi Kondo, who would later direct Whisper of the Heart for Studio Ghibli, completed the 2-minute pilot animation for the movie before leaving himself. Eventually, the movie would be directed by Masami Hata. The credit lists far too many story consultants for health, but the final script was penned by American Chris Columbus, who's probably better known for his work on the Home Alone movies, The Goonies, and the first Harry Potter film. Part of the visual designs are credited to French comic artist Jean Giraud, who works under the name of Mobius usually, though I personally find it hard to see his influence here. To give you an idea of just how long this production process took, consider that between the time Miyazaki, Takahata, and Kondo left the project in 1983 and the movie was finally released in 1989, Miyazaki and company worked on Sherlock Hound, made Nausicaa the Valley of the Wind, formed Studio Ghibli, then made Castle in the Sky Laputa, My Neighbor Totoro, Grave of the Fireflies, and Kiki's Delivery Service. But what really matters is what ended up on the screen. In terms of animation, the work here is really splendid, very fluid. TMS made this movie shortly after they finished work on Akira, and they seem to have wanted to extend themselves even further. Artistically, the character designs provided some modernization to the original designs from McKay's comic strip. The writers even made sure to include a scene with the classic walking bed that famously carried Nemo off to Slumberland in the original strip. The character designs look a touch more like Disney than anime, but really somebody on the American side of this production should have told the Japanese artist that making Flip like a black-faced refugee from a minstrel show might have been acceptable in 1905, but was really uncomfortable in 1990 or 2011 America. Dreamland itself has been drawn in bright and vibrant colors, though instead of original and imaginative architecture, it seems to have settled from borrowing from Alice in Wonderland. In contrast, Nightmare Land is illustrated in dark and menacing palette. The Nightmare King himself, with his satanic horns and glowing red eyes, seems to be a refugee from Fantasia's Night on Bald Mountain segment. In fact, a lot of this movie seems to want to be a Disney movie. Little Nemo was made in the two-decade interregnum between the death of Walt Disney and the 1990 rebirth of the studio. So, at the time, a Disney cartoon didn't seem like all that high a bar to reach. By the way, I know it's fashionable in anime circles to trash Disney, but I like Disney cartoons and animation. The same way I like both sushi and enchiladas. Not at the same time. So, how many anime have characters who break into song and dance numbers?
Now, let the lessons begin.
Oh, you got to get some etiquette if you want to be a prince. So we're here to meet you and to teach you lots of handy hints. How to sit and stand, how to look real.
Little Nemo features a couple of song numbers like that from the prolific songwriting team of Richard and Robert Sherman, who wrote It's a Small World for Disney, as well as some of my favorite songs from Disney's Mary Poppins. I didn't find their music and lyrics here quite so memorable. Little Nemo also relies on a lot of old jokes and familiar concepts. Some things that might seem clever for kids will just seem tired and stale for adults. Little Nemo was made to be dubbed into English, and it features a pretty good voice cast. As a children's film, I give Little Nemo, Adventures in Slumberland, 3.5 stars. There are enough bright colors and cute characters to entertain the grandkids for a little bit. But for adults, other than watching some well-done classic animation, the story doesn't offer much to hold your attention. Despite being a joint American-Japanese production made for an English dub, the film was actually released in Japan 3 years before it was released in America. Still, when it was released to American theaters, it had a wider release than any previous anime movie, including Akira. Not that it set any box office records, but it did make an impressive home video debut on VHS. The current North American home video release is a DVD from Funimation. That DVD offers only the English soundtrack. That's fine, it was after all made to be dubbed into English, and so you probably don't really need the Japanese. It also lacks English subtitles on that DVD, which you probably think is unnecessary for an English language DVD, but which I tend to think of as closed captioning. Thank you, please. The North American DVD is also disappointing in that it doesn't include the original pilot footage I mentioned earlier from 1982, created by Takahata, Miyazaki, and Kondo. The old Japanese Laserdisc box set included that. If you're interested, I'm sure you can track it down someplace. Thanks for watching.